Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Aaliya's for another episode of the Aaliya. Take it away.
So I'll start by acknowledging these two gentlemen, Samir and Rayan, audio experts. Give them a round of applause, please. They deserve it. Every week they hear me ramble and ramble and ramble. So punishment for them, pleasure for me. I also want to extend a round of applause to Neve in the back, one of the co-owners of Aaliya, standing up. Thanks to her, I get to do this live every week. And thanks to her, there's wine and cheese from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. And it's all types of Lebanese wine, if I got that right. Many types of Lebanese wine. So towards the end of the episode, if you want wine and cheese, it's available. Wine and cheese is one thing. Let's give a round of applause as well to the guest tonight, Lamia Moubayed. This podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners and viewers like you. Kindly consider a contribution through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the details box. Any amount is appreciated. And follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The handle, The Beirut Banyan. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. And to stay updated with video releases, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening, and thanks for watching. I'm Rani Shatar, and this is The Beirut Banyan.
The Institute was named after Basil Fuleihan, but it started sometime in 1996 when Fouad Senora, with consultation with Basil, decided that it would be opportune to have an institute for finance and customs, a kind of a knowledge center, a center where we could train a new staff that will be coming to doing a complicated job that is actual public financial management. And not many people know about public financial management in a modern way, in a way that would be aligned with international norms. And these new staff, these new personnel needed not only training, capacity building, but needed also ouverture, in opening up to what's going on in the world. Lebanon had closed, down during the war, and it got to be a small village where everybody was killing everybody. And most of the qualified staff of public service, and I don't know if you recall, but we had an excellent meritocratic public service that we prided ourselves on. Most people either died, left, and most of Ministry of Finance was dismantled, scattered, unorganized. Average age was way high, in the 56. So new blood was needed, and therefore new talent was needed. And upgrading whoever was there. So the idea was to get this thing going and to become kind of a dynamite and dynamo for instilling a new culture of service based on competence, on meritocracy, on transparency, and definitely leveraging the Lebanese youth and Lebanese talent.
So that's a thought that goes back some 30 years ago to 1996. Can you put that in perspective prior to Basil Fuleihan's death, what the Institute was doing in those days? I don't know much about the Institute's work before you arrive. So maybe that kind of retrospect, if you will.
Sure. The Institute did not start with me. I'm not responsible for all the massacres that came on later. Actually, it was la faute aux Français.
Right.
As we
it's
say.
It's a French-funded
It's a French-funded. And actually, the whole staff was French. We had a team of French Ministry of Finance staff who came and set up the Institute, which was located in Corniche al-Nahr. It was an old building for the Ministry of Finance where people used to get paid. It was the payroll place. And it was burned totally because it was at the ligne de démarcation, at the demarcation line. So it had a kind of a black history.
That's the old location pre-war? So
That's the old location pre-war. So the bet was on actually giving it a whole new look and transforming it into something, more of a light place, the place of light. So the French came, they did their job, helped by the team of the Ministry of Finance, advised by Basil under Fouad Senora, and they created this movement. And they started training people, newcomers, those who are there. But they trained them in French mostly, and that was not going very, very far. By the year 2000, they decided that it should be Lebanized. So more Lebanese staff came in, and my job, I was working then at ESCWA as a UN staff, and I got this invitation to apply to this job. I was not really very, let's say, satisfied and happy to kind of get my retirement early in the UN system. So I took the risk, I took this challenge to come and work for the public service, for the Ministry of Finance. Not being a public financial management expert myself, I'm a development economist. I have nothing to do with public finance. I understood zero, but I learned, and it was about management, it was about development, it was about institutionalizing the work, and it was about actually modernizing civil service, instilling, new practices. And that's what we tried to do during all these years. So three things for the Institute of Finance. We call them the 3 Ps. We do policies, so we try to actually do policy advice for the Ministry of Finance and the government when they want to listen. The second P is people, so we work on capacity building, not only in the training sense, but also in the production of guides and manuals that help them do a better job. So le sens large of capacity building. And the third P is partnership, so building partnership so that we bring in new modern practices, and we also make others benefit from the Lebanese experience. And yes, we had things to offer for a long time.
I'll add the fourth P, publications, which is why I brought my laptop with me. Those PDF files that are easy to digest. But before we get into the present, just going back a bit to two things. Basil Fuleihan himself, and why was it a French-focused institute? That I never understood that. There's no natural link. This is at a time Fouad Senoura's finance minister, if I'm not mistaken.
He's not francophone at all, Fouad Senoura.
The least francophone person.
And Basil was not francophone at all.
Right, exactly. And I know it's a French-funded partnership program, but what is the focus there?
There was a protocol signed between Jacques Chirac and Rafiq Hariri. That was the time when this protocol was for modernizing different aspects of Lebanese administration. And the Ministry of Finance took advantage of this funding available, but plus the technical assistance. And honestly, the French have a tradition of training and building capacity systematically inside civil service.
So it's not meant to go back to France. There's no. Was there a direct link to France at all? Or
it was run by the French Ministry of Finance.
Run by the French Ministry.
Run by the French Ministry of Finance.
That's interesting.
And Lebanon being also a French traditional legal system, it was easy.
Interesting. I never really understood why, because it makes much more sense to approach that institute the way you're doing it the last almost 20 years. So it makes much more sense today. And Basil Fuleihan himself, what does he mean to someone like you?
Yeah.
And as you can say whatever you'd like, I've honed in on his legacy so many times, but it's interesting to hear it from a public service professional, what he represents.
It's hard for me to talk about Basil because I knew him as a friend more than as a colleague. When I came to work at the Ministry of Finance, it was under Georges Orme. Georges Orme actually was the one who recruited me. And Basil was kind of exiting the Ministry of Finance. And he had
Exiting Ministry of Economy.
Ministry of Finance, because he used to be the advisor of the Minister of Finance.
Oh, I see, as an advisor. Okay.
Before becoming Minister of Economy, as advisor. And this is why his role was not, frontliner, but he was behind every single good thought there, if I might say. At the time, many reform projects were starting at customs, modernizing whole customs, creating all the... Now it sounds like if I'm, telling a bad story when I talk about custom, but believe me, in 2004, people came from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia. We welcomed study tours from the Gulf countries to come and look at the information systems that we were installing in customs and in cadastre and in tax. And one of the job of the Institute, being, partnership and development cooperation, was to structure and organize all these exchanges. So we were at a point in 2004, we had recurrent delegations coming to look at what we were doing.
Is he instrumental in the reform-initiated adventures that were taken pre-2005? Do you put him as somebody... Is he on his own, in a sense, a pillar? Because I've heard everyone refer to him as unique. A unique voice at a time where, yes, there is rampant corruption, but it looks like there are serious attempts from within at cleaning house. Is that an accurate way to describe his legacy?
Basil was an extremely wise person because he understood the systemic problems of the Lebanese system, the political, but also the power plays. And he was very strong technically, with a lot of modern ideas. And he actually tried to manipulate and maneuver within this very tough environment to actually move on some of the very important reforms that Lebanon had to undergo. And he left many marks in the Ministry of Finance, at the Ministry of Finance, like the reform of cadastre, of customs, of tax, of budget, but also at the Ministry of Economy when he worked on the competition law, when he worked on also the the Euromed agreement, etc. He represented everything that a young Lebanese would like to see. A young man who understood very well the power play, but who kept the right, line, and he actually moved things on.
I think there's someone in the audience that spoke to us before we started recording. His name escapes me now. Is it the gentleman with the red sweater?
Sami? No.
Sami, is he? Yes, Sami. So Sami reminded me, and this is a long time ago, I used to think of Basil as a friend too, but I was much younger. And that we met with Basil Fuleihan 30-some years ago in the States. My memories of him, it's funny, are purely positive and not political, one bit. It's almost like you said, friendship, even at a very young age. I think you can pick up on these kinds of unique people. It seems like he was driven in the right way and paid the ultimate price too. And that kind of reform from within, 20-some years ago, to what looks like a more anti-establishment sentiment today. Is your work trying to counter what could be a convenient narrative, which is burn the house down entirely and ignore a lot of the accomplishments that were made, however small they are? Do you feel like you're in a narrative battle too, where you're trying to honor reform from within decades ago and trying to push that too? Because I sense public service in itself does not always naturally appeal to somebody extremely frustrated, more activist-minded, that sees no good from within. And I can also imagine there is appetite to improve from within too. So are you stuck in that battle?
It is. First of all, it is a battle. And if you want to be in the public service, you have to have some militantism in your mind and in your soul. And you need to be also a risk taker, But you can also stay in the public service and not do that, of course. And that's not what we're talking about. But when I look at the young people that come to the Institute every now and then, because we run a youth program for financial literacy at the Institute. And yesterday we had a group from University of Saint Joseph student. The week before we had something called the Dictée des Finances, all to make, public finance some more palatable to the youth, but not only palatable, to make them relate this to their own lives, to their own well-being. And we have somebody in the audience who worked with me a lot on that, Hind Fadil. We did together this book, which is How to Pay Taxes. But it's not about how to pay taxes. It means procedural, but understanding the value of public money. Why is public money is important for every citizenship? What is the link of you with the policy choices that the government makes for you, and you having to have a voice as a citizen in the policy choices? Now, what I'm saying might seem completely today irrational to youth, but actually it's not. Maybe for us, because we are somehow feeling disappointed for all these problems and all these setbacks. But for a young mind who is today, starting or about to start a professional life, these things means a lot to him. And I saw in their eyes a starvation to know more about not only the problems, but how this state functions, who takes the decision, what influence who, what is the maneuver for a youth to be able to actually implement what he listens to every day. Like we tell him, you need to be active citizens, you need to lazim, mafrood, all these words, but where are the keys? And the keys is in first understanding how his state function, to understand what is the meaning of institution, who does what, who is responsible of who, and then he can make his choices whether to either become inactive citizens or just, give it up and go for something else. So all these young minds, they need information which they never get through their old curricula for geography and history, but for citizenship, Tarbiya Madaniya. And until today, they have a flu vision, total flu.
What does that mean, flu vision?
It's a completely opaque vision of the system they are trying to compose with. So they're living in a country which actually they don't understand the mechanics of. So it's like, driving a car, but you don't know what kind of car it is. And you don't know whether it will take you to any end or not.
So as an amateur, and I think I've said that many times to you in private, that I know my limitations in this subject. I'll count on you to correct me if I go off course. You feel free to also slap me if I say something wrong. I take punishment. No, I'm kidding. I'll try to navigate uncharted waters with my limited knowledge on what you're able to do in this climate. So we'll get into a few things that I think they're easy to understand, like citizen budgets that appeared on, I think it was just a few months ago, the 2023-2024 citizen budget. We'll get into public procurement, public investment. But in terms of the design and then the effectiveness, this kind of navigation, the Institute of Finance is tied to the Ministry of Finance. So there is a marriage of inconvenience, I suppose. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it. You're entrenched. I mean, you're deep. You see things from within, and you have that appetite from a younger generation that I think is more noble in what they're trying to see happen later, which is real accountability. And you said it already, that appetite is there too, for genuine reform among a young audience. And they're interested. They're coming to see you. And then you have the Ministry of Finance, I guess, upstairs, or I don't know, next door. How do you reconcile that in terms of politics, the way it is in this country, and then the answer is you know better. Is there a limitation as well that you're facing on a day-to-day basis?
It's a daily limitation. Actually, it's a daily struggle, Ronnie. And I'll open a parenthesis to talk about the state of institutions today, because the Lebanese, we might be sitting here and not being aware that we have institutions that are crumbling because of the crisis, because of the talent exodus, because of the devaluation of the lira, because of the budgets that are no more budgets, and that we have to operate with practically nothing and continue servicing. And I'm not only talking about the Institute of Finance, but I'm talking about institutions like the CNRS, which is the Council for Research, where we have scientists, top-notch scientists, where we run programs for detecting nuclear, anything with nuclear substances that come in the country. Yeah. I'm talking about institutions like Libnar, which sets the norms for safety of foods and construction and everywhere. And all these institutions which the Lebanese usually want to ignore. And they practically don't want to know much about them. But these people are Lebanese people. They are working and they understand very well what is the, let's say, the offering of the public good, this value proposition that they make every day. Like if you're talking, for example, about the Litani River Authority, which was a subject of controversy, the Litani River Authority has lots of engineers who make this institution, 69 years institution, work until today with practically very, very limited means. So we should be careful when we address, these public service in general. But to come back to your question, it is an everyday struggle for me as it is for them. Because you're sandwiched between a citizen that doesn't understand what you do, and he's always, saying that what is this corrupt government, etc., and another and a ministry or actually a top layer of policymakers, which unfortunately do not understand what public management is. And
you're being very diplomatic.
Yeah, I'm trying to be, not getting myself sacked, but I'm happy to be sacked. So, but for many years now, we have a class of politicians that are not really, maybe let's say, the creme of the creme of what the country needs, in terms of what the country needs.
I don't think you can get sacked for that. You have to go a little rougher than that. That's too polite.
Yeah. But being sandwiched doesn't, you have two reactions. Either you just leave or you decide to stay. And for people like me who kind of past the age of going and working in Washington with the IMF or whatever, or leaving back or going back to the UN, and because we don't want to just let our institution fall. There are many people like me. I'm not alone in this fight. Yeah. And what we call these the insiders' revolution. There is a theory that is by a French philosopher called Rosan Vallon about all these militant from the inside. And sometimes you think because you are an NGO or you are a lobbyist group or you are a political party that you can do the job of government by assuming the role of an institution. Well, most evidence point out that you cannot, and that your best bet is to work with those people and put back the institution on the agenda of development.
In your mind, as a success story, one of these students that comes to you for knowledge and uses that knowledge from within, is that to you the success that you're looking for?
Absolutely. We're looking for people who are more interested in public management issue and public financial management issue, and who can become the force that can help us from the outside, me or others. But we have to kind of break this divorce between the Lebanese and their state. And frankly, it's hard because after August 4 and what happened, everybody blamed the state for what happened. Yeah. But we forgot that it is a state that is captured, and that even if we destroy the state, what would be left for us to work with?
I guess that's, you're in a way, you're better asking my question, which is, how do you address that answer? Because I know many, many individuals that have gone down that road. And some of them have grown older with me too, and they're still committed. They work within these institutions. And you know that their intentions are good. And then you're absolutely right. State capture has defined our generation. So how do you answer that? Is it still a success that there are militants from within and that's really how you measure it? Or do you see something that you're able to do that's maybe unaccomplished? Because I don't know how you can do more than what you've done.
It's getting more and more difficult, Roni, because we're losing people from our side. The last 5 years, by not doing the reforms that should have been done, by the government isolating the country from the international opportunities that were offered to it, this drove not only the private sector to exode, but talent in government to do the exode. During the 20 years, we trained thousands of people. And for the past 4 years, I spent a lot of my days writing recommendation letters for people to leave. And these people were highly trained. They were trained in Washington. They were trained at the OECD in France. They were trained. If you want to have a director for debt or budget today, or somebody who does a very good procurement planning or strategic procurement planning, you need 10 years to form that person, not less. A good macro fiscal unit, you need 10 years to build it. And this is what we are losing.
Yeah.
And they are going to build ministries of finance in Oman and Saudi Arabia and UAE. Wherever we go, we find them working with consultancy or consultant companies or working within the government. And this is a loss. And this is a terrible loss for the state, for the citizen, and for the cause of rebuilding the public institutions.
That's the definition of brain drain right there.
Yeah, in government, it becomes extremely more intense and extremely more difficult to revert.
Yeah.
And costly, because this is cost. This was an investment that was lost.
Right. You know, you're one of the few people I know that is still in this orbit of public service, even though you said...
I can introduce you to many.
Yeah, well...
More interesting people.
I don't know about that. More interesting than your sister? No, I'm joking. She's not in public service.
I have a long list, and I'm just, wishing that they won't leave soon.
Yeah. I meet them in places I wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes actually in the finance ministry itself.
Right.
And they're still there. But they're speaking the same language that they spoke 20 years ago. It's the same language Basil Fuleihan spoke too. So that's also disappointing. Decades can go by and it's the same language of the same expectations that are not met.
Yes, Roni, but remember that we are in a region, and that's also, the advantage of working in the job we do. We tend to have a very long vision, understanding that you are in a geopolitical area where conflicts are recurrent, where they are intense and increasingly intense, but they are recurrent. So you have a cycle of 8 to 10 years of peace and stability, and then it relapses. Actually, there is a paper by the IMF on that shows you throughout the years, from the 1940s till today, the recurrence of this conflict. And you would see that compared to all other regions in the world, the MENA region is unique in the recurrence of conflict. Yeah. So when you think that this is the context that you are in, you tend to prepare yourself and anticipate. If you're good at anticipation, you are good at governing.
I completely agree. Geopolitics is why Basil Fuleihan is not with us too. So that You're absolutely right. Let's go into the citizen budget first, because as an amateur, I found that to be the easiest one for me to digest. I think it's even stated in the document, this is designed for the average citizen. You make it very clear why Lebanon is not working. But going into that citizen budget, is the purpose solely education, or does it go beyond that? Are you actually chasing people for a living?
Well, the first objective was myth busting.
Myth busting.
Myth busting.
Okay, so what are the myths you're busting in this document?
That's also one, one of the myths is that the budget is a budget.
I was going to ask you about
So when you open the citizen budget, the first thing you will read that this budget is not a comprehensive budget. Everybody tends to think that what we discuss at the parliament, we spend days and days discussing that this has the complete picture of the finances of the state. Well, our little small tiny mini document actually explains that it's not. There is one graph that is pretty much, easy to in one snapshot. It took us days and days to actually sort out this graph, and it shows that how much of other budgets exist outside the budgets. And when you understand where the problem is just by looking at the first page.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this cannot be, solved except by a budget reform. And this is something that we are trying to push for, trying to also lobby for. And it's something technical, not very difficult. We succeeded in procurement reform. It's much more complicated than budget reform. But there was a window of opportunity there and a champion that helped us move it. We're just waiting for the right time, not waiting, but I'm actively seeking and looking for a window of opportunity for another reform. Now, you're going to tell me, why do we need to wait for windows of opportunity? Why there is no rhythm for actual moving into reforms? Well, that's again the problem of the country.
We'll get into the procurement reform in a bit, but just going back to the myth busting, what is your political relations to the Ministry of Finance? Are you there sort of showing people facts? What exactly do you do there?
Yeah, that's important to clarify. The Institute is when we transformed it from a project, we chose a legal format, which is a public autonomous institution, independent financially, administratively, and technically, reporting to the Minister of Finance. So it is a light tutel. We report to him on two things, mostly the budget, the annual report, and when we need to do partnership agreements. So this is the light tutelage. We call it tutelage in Arabic, wisaya. And
so it's just a reporting mechanism.
Yeah, a reporting mechanism.
It's not meant to have any political leverage.
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, there are ministers who, of course, try to influence you in their direction. And this is where, again, your independence as a public leader comes at play. You can say yes and you can say no.
But I'm sorry to
and
make
you pay the price.
No, but to make it even more specific, I'm sorry, you don't have to answer this, but you're myth busting a budget. Do you go to Yusuf Khalil and show him the myth busting?
We not only we did that, but we did it within the Ministry of Finance, including the Budget Directorate, and we did more. We did another more technical paper on what we call extra budgetary spending.
And these are the parallel budgets.
Yes, and the number was quite off-budget spending.
Off-budget. What was the first time?
Say that extra budgetary, but actually
extra
the right word is
spending.
Off-budget spending.
Corruption can sound so classy sometimes.
Yes.
Say it again. What is it?
Extra budgetary. Or
extra budgetary spending.
It's off budget. The technical word is off budget.
No, off budget sounds closer. I like extra curricular activity.
Yes, exactly. That's it. They are extracurricular.
Oh, too many.
Yeah.
So you have built-in constraints anyway. It's up to the minister to either listen or to try, perhaps unfairly, try to steer you in a different direction. Yes. But you're there to just report.
Yeah, but we don't only do that for the ministry, nor for the government, nor for the parliamentarian. Actually, when we did the first time the citizen budget, we had calls from different parliamentarians saying how that for the first time, they understood a little bit what is a budget. So
right.
people who were there for more than 9, 8, 10 years, and so yeah, we have a an issue.
I'm sorry, this is a naive question. Aside from the more student-focused audience that's there to learn, in terms of political class, who do you find most interested in what you're producing? I know the minister may or may not take what you're saying into consideration, but are there MPs that are reaching out? Are there other ministers?
Yes.
What is the audience like?
There are MPs who actually reach out to us to ask us about specifics. We reach out to many people, and this is one of the strategy that we used from day one. And this is what made the Institute reputation. It's not a Ministry of Finance / sometimes people come in and say, are you government? You say, yes, we are the government that you want. So we reach out to people. We organize on regular basis meetings with CSOs, with private sector, sometimes closed meetings, sometimes open meetings. We talk a lot with international organizations. For example, lately on Budget 2024, we did a lot of closed meetings explaining the different scenarios, their risks, and their problems. We try to do that in respect with the obligation of reserve, which is, as a public servant, you are not supposed to, justify everything your government does, but you're supposed to explain the rationale without having, a political judgment on it. And this is why public service is important. You can bring light to decisions without having, a political tension within. And I think this is why it's interesting to have this, the public service away a little bit or shielded from political interference, because you need this buffer. You need those people who are professional enough to deal with everybody without having, a political tint.
I don't know if I think it's still there. There's a UNDP project associated with the Ministry of Finance.
There was.
It's okay. So that's gone. Is it that kind of role that you're there and not there? Because I know that kind of outfit is trying to influence both sides, but also has limitations. Is that simply a reflection of what you do as well? You said it. You're the government that you want, but you're not really empowered to. You're there just to offer information.
Yes, but historically, Roni, all public leaders, let's call them leaders because they are leaders, when they are competent enough and ethical enough and, they earn their place in this world, they do not need to answer to a political level. And I listened to many, many public servants, older. When I came first time to the Institute of Finance, my first, exploit or success was to gather all these old people who used to be in the public service, who used to be director generals or a chief of sections, and involve them in the work that we did at the Institute. And believe me, we learned from them this passion for public service. We learned from them what is right and what is wrong. We learned from them. One of them told me, "Ya binti, you listen, when I went to the Ministry of Finance the first time, because we were working on a program for new recruits, how to welcome the new recruits out of the Ministry of Finance and make them understand what a new Ministry of Finance should be." He nodded his head and he told me, when I started the first time at the Ministry of Finance, I came in with a cravat and a tasquido, not tasquido, with a complet. Yeah. And I found a table that waited for me, a chair, and a whole set of manuals and guides for me to read and comment on. And my superior did not give me a file immediately. He waited until I was ready, and he decided when I could tackle an issue that concerns a citizen. And when he told me that, that was quite heartwarming, but at the same time, telling us, hey, where are we? Where are we standing today?
But just to borrow from you said the militantism that you'd like to see from within. Do you now expect? I'll ask it in a sort of a fair way. Are you pushing certain individuals to listen more? Are you there to try to leverage what you know with people that you identify with? So, in other words, are there particular MPs that you want them to listen to what you're saying? Is it personality driven, where you simply have a certain minister that behaves a certain way and may take it into account or may dismiss it? I mean, what kind of militantism do you want specifically?
When you're trying to move things, and you might criticize me and many for that, you don't see the person, you don't see the minister, you don't see the parliamentarian, you see your objective, and then for you he becomes or she becomes a tool actually to move on a national agenda.
Because you mentioned that you sometimes reach out directly.
Yes.
Are you looking at politicians?
We try to find champions who could be interested in a endeavor.
So that's not just the minister.
No, it could be a parliamentarian, it could be anybody.
And as much as you'd like to say, are there particular people you've been impressed by in recent history? Are there individuals that you work with productively?
Again, I don't see them. I'll be very, very frank. I don't see them. I see my
close
objective.
your eyes when you talk to them. And
because there is nobody who is not tinted in this country from the political arena, and it's a small country, and everybody knows the ins and outs. So if you want to be, you have the choice. If you decide to just look at him or her, you won't find anybody to work with. If you want people who are aligned with your vision,
So just how does it work then? Is it just your?
I'll tell you the story of public procurement. That's a telling story.
Okay, we'll get there for sure. But just one more on the budget, because you've made it easy to understand. How does it work? Are you cold calling? Are you just reminding them that you have this?
No, we fight for it. We fight for it because we don't have a say on how the budget is actually done. This is the job of the Directorate of Budget and of the other ministries, because the budget is not only done by the Ministry of Finance. Actually, every institution in this country does its own budget, and then the Ministry of Finance is supposed to be upfront, giving the directives through the budget circulars issued by the Minister of Finance, which sets a little bit, the boundaries of the budget, the macroeconomic framing of the budget, and then the Ministry of Finance compile it and produce it with a vision based on a vision, based on policy choices, based supposedly on a medium term and longer vision. This is not at all what is happening today. We know that the current budget practices are not at all aligned with anything we teach at the Institute of Finance. And it's been a long while since anybody has done good budgeting. This is why we end up with budgets that are not budgets, unfortunately. But this is for me, a lost battle until we actually find the window of opportunity to move on a budget reform. Everything we do, all what we discuss when it concerns to this budget is meaningless.
I'm glad you're actually saying it that way. So you acknowledge that this is a lost battle, but the window of opportunity does exist in procurement.
Yes,
and you had, if I remember right, you had help on the way.
Yeah.
So let's go there.
Yeah, I want to say that what we did in budget is called budget transparency. And this is why it's interesting, because by producing the citizen budget, you are creating a more awareness on the importance of having more transparency by understanding better the figures. And the fact that we actually created a dashboard for the citizen budget, it allows the young generation to actually go in and play with the data. So this 1,200 pages of a huge document, which is, extremely appalling, becomes actually data with screens and graphs and interesting to play with. So you could see, for example, if you're looking at how much we spend on personnel or how much we are spending on social spending. If you want to dig more into infrastructure, you can find, more, and you can compare. Now that we have it over 5 years, you can compare. So with time, we would like this to become a practice of open data so that young generation who is data, let's say, enabled or data demanders would push for more and more open data and digitization of basic financial data.
I'm going to embed that into the episode itself because it is very user-friendly.
It is.
But let's go to procurement and the window of opportunity and the maybe limited success.
Why procurement? Why procurement? Because procurement is the other side of budgeting. So in budget, you are planning. You are deciding how you want to spend your money. It's as simple. And in procurement, it is how you spend your money. So they are both linked because to do good procurement, you need to do good budgeting. So you need to plan well and therefore have clear policy choices and over, a medium-term vision, of course. And then you need to use transparent methods and competitive methods to spend this money in a way that it is not captured by the few, in a way that is not, lost to corruption, in a way that is also visible. I mean, in ways that can serve other secondary objectives like sustainability, like a green procurement, like social responsible behavior of suppliers.
Is it fair to suggest that this is where corruption is most experienced in Lebanon?
In the whole world, yes.
In the whole world, but I mean, in your...
Yes. According to OECD, the figures that we got from the bribery report that they produce, more than 57% of corruption cases are linked to procurement.
Across the world?
Across the world.
And do you know in Lebanon's case what the percentage is? Is it 100%?
It's hard to compute because, again, we have a problem of data. We tried to compute at the Institute more or less what the volume of procurement. And before 2019, the numbers that we could estimate were around 6.2% of GDP, which around, let's say, 3 billion. But this does not include military spending, so military procurement, and non-centralized spending, which means the municipalities and the public...
does not include that.
No, and public institutions like EDL, etc., etc. So again, we have, the problem of numbers. But this could generally, if you want to look at the word, it's between 20 and 30% of GDP. Okay, so it's a huge number. So governments are the biggest buyers; they are the biggest spenders, and this is where the opportunity to do well becomes important. How do we make it easy for people to understand? Is that we all procure, we all purchase things, and government purchase things. They purchase goods, they purchase infrastructure, they purchase services, exactly. And all this money goes into the economy. So if you have rules that are more clear, more transparent, more competitive, more green, more socially responsible, you can do a better job spending the money. And this spending becomes a driver for better economic growth and more inclusive.
So what are these successes that you've seen then? Because you mentioned a window of opportunity and then help on the way. Yeah. What is that?
We saw procurement very early. Like we started maybe in 2013 working on public procurement. So we saw it very early. And why? Because it's an intrinsic function of finance, yes, and because there is no body responsible for it except from the point of view of finance people, it's finance. So we said, and we don't have any sort of good regulation on procurement. We don't even have a law on procurement.
Sorry, is this all managed by the Ministry of Finance, or is it spread out?
The old system, there were thresholds. So for small threshold, every entity could do the procurement. And once you get to a certain threshold, we had a directorate for public procurement who did your procurement. But actually, it did only 5% of the procurement. So,
but it used to be under the Ministry of Finance?
No, under central inspection. Under central inspection, which is an awkward, phenomenon. But again, for a reason we don't know. No, we actually know why. Because procurement was understood as a legal activity, not an economic one. Okay, so for a long time it was considered just contracting. Yeah. So not an actual. Planning, deciding, seeing the efficiency, the effect on small, medium enterprise, etc., etc. So and becoming a strategic function of government is only a recent phenomenon.
So since 2013, that's the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go
back. We started with that, and we noticed that there are no procurers in the government. There is no job called public procurer. And we started training people who are responsible for spending money to spend it better. And from then on, we did a survey and we understood the extent of the problems. And we developed curriculum and exchange programs and certifications to go along to. Lebanese like to learn. That's the catch in Lebanon. Everybody likes to learn. And whenever you offer a good product, you will be amazed how people enlist themselves. People in government learn a lot. Those who want to learn, of course, and those who want to do a good job. So that was quite positive for us, and it encouraged us. We knew that we should move to a different phase. But then at one point, there was an office of the Minister of Administrative Reform who was responsible for moving reforms. And this was considered a reform that AMSAR should move, but it did not move.
And that's post-2013? I
said post-2013, until a point when a minister came to us and asked us to put on our point of view on a draft law that was circulating in Parliament. And he was, quite surprised to see that the pages of our remarks were in centimeters, around 2 centimeters, whereas the law was like 1/2 a centimeter. So actually, it was such a bad law. And he was surprised, said, "What shall we do with this?" I said, well, you have to start from scratch. We cannot afford not to align ourselves with UN Citral procurement law. We cannot afford not to align ourselves with other procurement legislations that are around the region. Yemen was doing a new procurement law and an e-procurement system at the time before the war. Egypt had advanced. Jordan was quite advanced. Tunisia was starting its second year of e-procurement with a new legislation. Morocco was even more advanced than Tunisia. We were the last in class. And I'm not talking about only procurement, but in this case about procurement. So he gave us a mandate, a written mandate, to actually do a proposal and a work plan for reform. What did we do? We started with an evidence-based exercise called a MAPS. This is a scanner where you put in the system of public procurement and you scan it according to 124 different indicators. This is an international methodology. And guess what, Roni? The results,
machine broke.
Exactly. The results were worse than we expected. So in terms of legislation, we got a 0 on all indicators. Wow. In terms of the second, pillar of MAPS was competition and market, we got very low grade. In terms, of course, of transparency, we got a very, very low grade and on capacity. So what did we do? We took all MAPS recommendations and MAPS weak point, and based on this result, and based on a review of all the legislation in all countries around the world, we set up a team of 9 experts, legal economists and policy experts, Lebanese and international. We got help from the World Bank and OECD Sigma, and we set up a vision to move on, and we started at the same time drafting the law.
This is when? This is pre-October 17?
This was 2018.
2018.
18. The window opened in February 2020. This was the time when the draft law that we prepared was submitted to Parliament by 2 parliamentarians. And these 2 parliamentarians, one of them was a champion of the reform.
Do you mind naming who they are?
No, but both we had Michel Moussa and Yassine Jaber.
Oh, okay.
And a month after that, 2 months after that, we had a committee in Parliament formed, headed by Yassine Jaber, with 11 MPs. We started discussing the law. So that was we thought at this point that this is going to be window dressing. It's too good to be true. But there were lots of let me call them political lobbying, lobbying from the international community, a lot of work with the private sector, with the NGOs, for them to work with us. And again, this alliance of good everywhere helped us move the agenda forward. Whenever we got stuck in Parliament, because there were lots of... This law is about money. Okay, and about interest.
I'm sorry, this is a very naive question. Was this trying to match IMF deal expectations at the time?
Yes, and we definitely benefited from that.
So the momentum was coming from
everywhere.
The beginning of the story, really.
You had the civil society asking for more transparency after the explosion and after all what happened and after the evaluation. You had a moment in the private sector, the good private sector pushing for more transparency in public procurement. You had also the international
pre-blast, right?
Pre-blast. And you had the international community with the, of course, the IMF roadmap and the French roadmap also.
Right.
So there was this political moment, and we just grabbed it. So we moved on, and luckily we had a champion that was ready to move on and do a score.
Who is this champion?
This Yassine Jaber.
Yassine Jaber,
Yeah.
I see.
This champion was Yassine Jaber.
So that's 4 years ago, and I'm guessing...
The law got voted in 2021, and implementation started in 2022.
2022?
Yeah.
The last 2 years... the law and its implementation, and then how public procurement actually works. Could you expand on that? Earlier, we talked about citizen budget on paper and then extracurricular activity. Is there something similar happening where you have the right law and then the wrong policy?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because it's good to have a law, because at least now you have a system, and you eventually can lean on a legal structure that is modern and that is, if implemented, will get you somewhere. So it's the first and only structural reform that got to move on. But the law needs tools to be implemented, and the whole procurement system needs not only the law, it needs processes, procedures, standard bidding documents like standard contracts. It needs an electronic platform where all these bids are published. You need also a complaint mechanism that works. Today, we do not have a complaint mechanism, and this is why the private sector is very upset. You need people who are trained and know how to do better planning of procurement and better management of procurement. And this is where we are kind of behind.
Maybe not so much behind the scenes, let's say the more public information. Are there examples that you've seen the law applied incorrectly? Have you seen examples of procurement and then corruption hand in hand? doesn't have to be so quiet behind the scenes. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example in the last 2 years where you've seen this go wrong.
Everything is reversible in this country, is easily reversible.
Yeah.
And if you think that is not that what you are doing, or let me put it this way, if you have a weak heart and will get disappointed easily because what you did has been dismantled by somebody else, well, you're not in the right job.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the country. It's exactly like the recurrence of conflict. Here you have the recurrence, you have a relapse, let's say. You relapse. But you try to do better next time.
I'm trying to think of a unique example that you've seen up front, because you accomplished something.
Yep.
That there is a law in the books at least, and we also know that Lebanon has plenty of decent laws that are not applied. Have you seen something up front where this law is abused or taken advantage of, and then you've witnessed that corruption happen, even with the law in the books? Without getting anyone particular in trouble. I don't know. It doesn't have to be personal. Just
we are lucky today. We don't have much money to disburse. So we do not have a huge project like in the old days. So in the old days, there was a work done by researchers at LCPS that showed that most of infrastructure procurement for 10 years went to 10 companies. And
the same 10 companies.
The same 10 companies. And to tell you the extent of capture, it's a published work by LCPS. It's too soon to actually do these kind of analysis because we're less than a year. And we are at a time where there is no procurement. Actually, there is no big procurement. Most of the procurement is on some donor funding, which following donors' rule. The only episode or the public know of is the episode of the airport, where the law helped uncover a misprocurement.
Was that they were leaning on the law?
Yes, they were leaning on the law.
This
is the excellent example.
But can you remind me? It was meant there was some huge investment that was.
It was to enlarge and expand. Thank you.
Through a company that was chosen incorrect.
So there was no competitive bidding.
Competitive bidding. Yeah. So that's the law.
Yeah, that's the law.
And who exactly was the whistleblower then?
There was an inside whistleblower who actually drew the attention of the Public Procurement Authority that intervened and stopped, of course, the...
So let's say that's a success story.
That's a success story.
How exactly does that happen? There's no complaint mechanism. Does it mean that the insider has to have leverage too? Has to have some political influence? Is that how you see success today?
I think what is interesting in this law is that you cannot move on. It's illegal. I mean, even the money cannot get disbursed to the actual bidder, or not to the bidder, to the one who gets the contract, if the procedure is not followed. That's the new law.
And it's applied when you have someone with leverage from within.
Absolutely.
So that's the kind of recipe today. You need people behaving better.
Absolutely.
With influence.
Absolutely.
I see.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's really expecting the best out of a ungovernable situation.
Yeah. And at small scale, what's interesting also, and what we're seeing in some of the municipalities who had lots of problems applying the law because they thought it was too complicated, today they are seeing the good advantages. They are expanding their suppliers list. They are getting more and better offers. And those who are trying to do good procurement, they are producing better product, better services at lesser prices, which we got lots of witnesses coming and telling us stories inside the training sessions about, how they changed their mind.
Is it public information, the whistleblower?
No, the name, no.
Is it you?
No, I'm not in the Ministry of that.
All right.
But we have a law that protects whistleblowers, and he could only do that because there was also illegal mechanisms where he could do that.
But
again,
I can't imagine that functioning and then nothing else is working. The hotline is protected, but then the country doesn't function. I assume this person had enough influence to not have any consequence.
Yes, absolutely. And there is also the power play.
Right. Yeah. Which may not always be for the right reason.
Absolutely.
So let's say the right thing happens
for the wrong reason.
For the wrong reason. Has that been...
And the wrong reason, something happened for the right
so
reason.
The person that called,
yeah,
is that now the guy who has a contract with the airport?
No, actually, no.
No. Okay. All right. His friend? Maybe. Yeah. So there's no guarantee anyway that things are going to move in the right direction, even when...
No. And there is no guarantee until today, because the law has been, is not yet, if you want, the law is there, but the cadre is not finished. Yeah. You need the secondary legislation, you need the standard bidding document, you need the e-procurement system up and running, you need the complaint mechanisms, and all this system to work. It is like a table. You need all the... It needs to sit on four or five different axes. For the time being, you have only the law.
Yeah. So 2 more quick points. Is public investment more or less the same thing as public procurement? Is there...
Public investment is actually another big taboo and another myth in this country that we need to bust. There are so many myths. Procurement was one of them. Budget was one of them. We tend to all think, Lebanese, that we need a Ministry of Planning to plan the investment for the country and to have, this 10-year, 5-year, 10-year plan. Well, lots of evidence point out to that this is an idea that doesn't work, and that actually the country needs to have an institution who works with other institutions to have a framework for planning investment. And this framework needs to follow a certain sequencing and priority and a certain mechanism where the Ministry of Finance can intervene and say, no, we cannot do this project because it carries budget risks. And yes, we can move on with this project because it has a budget risk that we can manage.
So let's say there's more myth busting happening.
Not yet, not on this front, not on public investment management. There is a long way for us to work on in there, but this is one of the reforms that will be extremely important for the country. If and when there will be a movement for structural reforms, this country needs lots of investment in its shabby and practically obsolete infrastructure, and we're going to need to have some framework around that.
So let's agree that there's no need for that fictional Ministry of Planning?
Yes.
So
at least to me.
At least to you, what is the ideal situation right now for investment management?
There is none. There is nothing today.
Okay.
There is nothing. We don't know why we're doing this project or whether we should do it as a priority or not. And this has been going on for a long period of time. And all those who worked at CDR or at the Council of Ministers know that the way the project were prioritized or sequenced did not follow any logic.
Pre-collapse, what was the standard procedure?
There was none. It was
nothing.
A list, and it was political arbitrage.
I see. And now it's only gotten worse.
No, there is nothing. No.
There's nothing now. There's nothing.
Or very little.
A final point before we go to break and then Q&A. We spoke yesterday on the phone, and we both remembered a document that goes back maybe 12 years ago. It's a joint publication with the Institute of Finance and the Daily Star. It's on oil revenue and profit sharing mechanisms pre the Line 23 maritime negotiation. This is going back to the old Hoff-Line days, Frederick Hoff, and the negotiations that were stalled.
May 2012.
Thank you for that. May 2012. Now, it's called offshore gas, belongs to the Lebanese, so let them see the money. You reminded me. So this is something that's buried in my mind. It's my father's thoughts on profit sharing. And this is after he left the Ministry of Finance. He was Minister of Finance for 9 months or so, between 2008 and 2009. This is published years later. I like the way you described it. You said it's an unusual way for a liberal economist to become nearly populist, which is true.
Absolutely.
That type of idea that's coming from within the state, at least from a former minister, trying to circumvent the state. And just to sum it up briefly, you can correct me here if I go off track. It's based on something called the Alaska model, which is I think it's applied in a few cases only, where profit goes directly to citizens, and that's the story.
Absolutely. Right.
The state cannot be trusted to handle that money. Citizens are the right beneficiaries. And this is an unusual way of thinking here. A politician of sorts saying all these politicians deserve nothing. Is that the militantism you're describing?
Absolutely. And Roni, we bugged late Muhammad Shatah, Allah yarhamu. We bugged him to write something on this issue. First, in our publication, this is a sophisticated publication that was issued 6 times, and it was called As-Sadisa. And the As-Sadisa was the journal of public money management and state building. That's what we called it. And every issue of As-Sadisa dealt with a subject. And we had chosen oil and gas to be one of our, it was the 5th subject, actually. And he agreed. This is before actually this second publication. And his article, this op-ed, was entitled "How to Save Lebanon from Its Looming Fortune."
Right. Yeah.
And what he presented was quite surprising. It was he argued a radical approach. This radical approach, which supported direct capital transfer of natural resources revenues to all Lebanese to boost household income and to stimulate economic activity. And he probably argued for that because he understood the complexity of the system and of the power play. And to him, it was illogical and unfair that the government takes all the receipts. And I think he was influenced by these economists and development specialists. One of them is used to be the World Bank Director for Economic Policy and Poverty Reduction in Latin America. His name is, I noted it not to forget it because it's Marcelo Guigale. He, with many economists, and I argued against setting up these funds. So the Alaskan model came as a direct, consequence of all these discussion. And the Alaskan model was based on a transfer direct. So every Alaskan citizen got a yearly annual check, which these funds were managed by a fund directly servicing the Alaskan citizen. The fund was set up for this matter of fact. And it's kind of, today when you think about what is happening and all the discussion at Parliament for the management of the oil and gas revenues, you think about Muhammad Shatah's proposal, and you see that, ironically, he saw that these oil and gas, Lebanon oils and gas, is more of a curse than as a blessing.
So looking at that kind of thought process, my personal memory is him not wanting to be a finance minister and happy to not be a finance minister 9 months later. So there's that chapter, but also somebody who's speaking in a way that's extremely unusual in that the state cannot be trusted.
Right.
Is that for you? I mean, are you looking at that as circumventing the state today is a good approach? Because I think of that as almost, it's saying it up front 12 years ago, this state cannot handle that kind of situation.
State, yes, with the current capture.
Yes, this current
definitely.
state capture. Would you, 12 years later, say that that is one of the few ways forward?
He was one of the few people who saw it right, if not the only one, on this particular subject.
Well, we'll leave it there. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll open the floor to Q&A. Thank you, Lamia Moubayed.
Thank you.
And thanks to the audience too. Let's make the Q&A fun. Questions for Lamia, questions for me about anything you'd like. The gentleman at the front, just introduce yourself, what you do, who you are.
That's a bit complicated. My name is Lamia Moubayed. I'm a design thinker and a process strategist. And currently I am the chairperson of the Arts and Design Department at the American University of Science and Technology, AUST, which is down the road here. I just want to link two parts of your conversation because I'm very familiar with القانون الشراء العام because I've been following this up as part of the Reformation. But there's also one point that you mentioned at the beginning of the talk, which is awareness to people and the rights of the citizen and how do we know about what we are doing or that. What I found missing was the awareness. يعني I was following a certain radio station without mentioning any names, because I'm interested into politics and economy and reformation and all that. And because of my, following up on this, for this radio station in particular, I could hear about what was going on, which was not advertised on any other media. Is there any plan to make this قانون الشراء العام accessible and for people to know the difference and what kind of reformation is happening? Is there any media campaign? Is there any way of advertising this for everybody? Okay, creating awareness around it and all that.
Yes. Oh, it felt, no.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Originally, when we did the plan for procurement reform, awareness building was part of it. Unfortunately, we had expectations for financing a reform because this is one of the most complicated reform, and you need to do not only awareness, but even, I can call it a little bit of education around public procurement stuff. You need to make them easy for people who are on both sides, on the demand and on the supply side. And you need to also make citizens make the connection with the quality of the services they want to get. For example, if you procure a bad road, you're going to end up, spending a lot of maintenance on your car, etc., etc. But unfortunately, we, for financial reasons, we had to limit a lot of our activities. Now, there is no other excuse. But كمان, to be honest, and civil society had a role to play, and in my view, they didn't play it enough, which is using all the material that was produced at the Institute, and there is a huge amount of videos, small leaflets, explanation notes, etc., to do the awareness job themselves. And this did not happen, unfortunately.
Along the same lines, for example, and especially because I am a follower, and I was not aware that there was some literature produced, if you know what I mean. I think creating this awareness will help people to be able to make a decision and to see or to differentiate right from wrong.
Absolutely.
Like, especially the new generation, because part of my education career, and when I talk with my students about being a socially responsible designer, and how to create a social reformation using design as a tool to create this reformation and all that, there is no such awareness about what kind of job you are doing, what kind of change you are trying to create. And I think, now an idea just popped into my mind. Would be lovely to have you over, talk to the students, even if they are at a younger age, we're talking 23, 24, but to know that there are good things happening in the country, regardless of all the, opposite of what's happening. And I don't think this requires a budget, as more like requiring a networking and trying to create this, talks. And because still at this point in time, the best marketing strategy in Lebanon is word of mouth.
صحيح.
So
we need to create the stories. Thank you. Yes, we are ready to do, and thank you for the invitation. We have a very good network of experts, Arabic speaking also, who can easily do a very good job at that. But what I want to warn is that we need good stories to tell. And we don't have yet good stories. We have bad stories. We have stories of sabotage, like what was done for the airport, but we do not have good stories, and they need time to get out. You need to convince people. The trust is so much broken between the citizen and the state, the young people and the state. You need more work. And wa'alla, you're going to sound extremely shallow. So maybe also this will come eventually if we have some opportunity to do some good job. Not true?
Yeah.
Process that you went through. Sorry, I butt in, but no, you do have a good story. And the good story, you just told it in the first section, is the whole process that you went through to get the law passed in the most hostile environment, the most unlikely environment and on that particular topic, and the most difficult topic. And the political backlash that or pushback that the law experienced a posteriori also. So if this had happened a priori as strongly as a posteriori, maybe the law would not have passed. So no, there is a success story, and it is an example to be given to pursue other difficult.
I agree, Mark, Ramzi. You're right, and we are very bad at doing this job. So we need help. We are really bad at capitalizing on the experience. They call it capitalisation sur l'expérience. We definitely are in an unauthorizing environment. Another way we are today operating, and I don't want to sound nagging, but we can only open the Institute 2 days a week because we cannot pay even the fuel to run the generator. This is today our daily hassles. We are obliged to, part of our thinking, to go into managing these stupidities instead of putting our heart and mind into what we should do.
Actually, I'll ask a question before going back to the audience, and I don't want to. I'll be devil's advocate. Do you find that civil society may sometimes produce the wrong message?
Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely.
But I'm going to link it now to an uncomfortable place. The beginning of the episode, you were very clear in saying the region is to Lebanon's disadvantage. There's state capture. And at the same time, there's an appetite for reform. I don't know if civil society always addresses those the right way. I've seen a lot of civil society ignore that altogether, try to put that on the side, and then go into behavior. I'll say it maybe in a better way. Almost like corruption in itself is in Lebanon's DNA, rather than the source of state failure producing bad behavior. And you mentioned it, I think, by accident. I don't mean it about them, but you said there are citizens in a state. I know you're not referring to that party in particular or that type of person, but they, to me, are the most eager to reform. I've seen some of those documents produced that I think misses the story, the wider story of state failure. And that's civil society. So is there anything there that maybe they're not capable of speaking politics? They're only capable of speaking numbers.
It's a tough subject because we tend to see black and white. We tend to see good and bad, corrupt and not corrupt. There is no nuance in the way we think. And there is also no grounding in the way we approach our relationship with the triangular relationship, private sector, government, and civil society. But governance cannot work if this triangle doesn't work at least in a correct manner or in a semi-correct manner. If anybody wants to do the job of the state or the government wants to do the job of the private sector, it will not work finally. The governance system works when there is a positive, constructive relationship, at least, characterizing this triangle. In Lebanon today, you have private sector thinking that he can do the job of the state, state institutions who think they can do better than the private sector, and you have civil society...
which has become anti-establishment.
Exactly. And we don't put enough thinking or discussion or myth busting again into, and we tend to think that everything can go well if the private sector runs public service, for example. That's I hear it a lot. Like, let us run the show and we can do better. Yeah, right. I mean, we've seen what you've done in the finance sector.
But let me try to polarize this a bit without causing too much friction. I don't think Gibran Basil is correct when he says Lebanon doesn't need a budget at some ski lodge on CNN. That to me is obtuse politics.
Absolutely.
On the other end of the spectrum, a World Bank report produced by civil society activists that ignores politics altogether.
Absolutely.
Those are extremes. But those extremes tend to define everything right now.
Absolutely.
So there is something, civil society doesn't always get it right. That's a, you would agree to that, at least.
It doesn't get it right, and it can do harm sometimes.
Okay.
By reproducing.
Thank you for acknowledging
it.
This.
It can do wrong sometimes. We have been quite vocal about that at the Institute in many of our activities and many of our forums, advocating for a more positive, but a more co-creation, if you want, a relationship with in some sectors specifically. Naila works in the education sector, and she knows very well, and she does a wonderful job doing the Lebanese alternative learning. This is a service for educating children who cannot go to school. So she digitizes the curricula. She got many prizes, including Malala, and every day she got a new prize. But she does the job. She doesn't do it for the government. She does it with the government, and she understand the difficulties of the institution she worked with within the Ministry of Education. And sometimes I'm speaking for you, Naila, but she's a very good example of somebody who comes from the civil society organization, acknowledging what he can give and the limitation of his role, and wanting to actually making what he produce sustainable through the existing institution. Everything you do outside the institution is bound to fall into l'oubli, into the forget, into oblivion.
Yeah, that's just the microphone. Yeah.
Something I learned. No. Just to acknowledge this is something I learned from Lamia. It was through our conversation, Lamia and I, that I learned that you cannot sustain and make a change if you work outside the system. So you need to work within the system. And thank you, Lamia, for teaching me this.
Oh, thank you, Naila. And while working with the system, Naila is reforming the system. Naila is modernizing the system. Naila is bringing capacity to the system. And that's the kind of relationship we're talking about. I'm very happy she's here, because sometimes what we talk about seems to be so theoretical.
Yeah.
But when you ground it and you put name and faces to it, it becomes so real. This happens and can happen in all other sectors too.
It's really the struggle between reform and revolution. And I think you're trying to bring a bit of revolution into reform when you say militant activists from within, but not to tear the system down. I think that's a struggle in itself. But are there more questions for Lamia? Mr. Wa'il al-Hajj, the reason we're doing this episode.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Roni, for having me.
Could you say what you do for a living?
Watch
this.
I'm a
Hold on, man. Please.
again.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So a consultant, and then the way I like to tell it is, Roni saw me once writing something about a manual that's related to public procurement. Let's put it that way. But speaking to what you just mentioned, and it's an interesting topic of how it was brought up, because last week on your podcast as well, you mentioned something about change MPs and how your view is, by your, as in Roni's view, you think that it's better to kind of start chipping at the problem slightly instead of burning the house down and rebuilding it. Coming back to today, to what Lamia was mentioning, which is CSOs who are usually advocating for let's change the whole system, drop everything down, throw government out, and try to build something new, doesn't work, or to this point at least hasn't worked. So I'm curious, bridging both on the political spectrum and then in public service as well. If we are to adopt the approach of let's start, change from within and kind of take small wins in the hope that small wins will add up to a bigger one at the end. How do you see that happening in the public sector? So does it have to start from only educating public servants, or, as you mentioned, or bringing them in, hiring proper public servants from the get-go, or a more contradictory part, or a more, let's say, challenging part, firing public servants who are not necessarily effective?
Thank you, Al, for the very easy question. Actually, your remark is wonderful, but it's set the question on a note that is somehow doesn't work, because the problem is not there. The problem is in the choice that the Lebanese have made. We have chosen to construct a sectarian, partisan, affair-based system, okay? And we vote for it every time we go to voting, whether we like it or not. And all the rest is a product of this choice. So somehow, if you want to change only by recruiting good people in a system that will not retain them finally, you will be wasting time and energy and investment. You can still do things like we are doing now. We are mending, okay? But we will not be able to move on unless there is a whole reform vision, a whole, let's say, movement for change that will come from an exogenous factor. Of course, doesn't mean that what we are doing is meaningless. No, we are the endogenous factor, and you need the endogenous factor. But we have to question the choices from the start. And this is a job that we're not doing enough. We are not doing at all, actually. And I think this is where it hurts. Do we still want this kind of government to be in affairs? What kind of next government or next vision? How do we see this country going? We have to pose all these questions in a more profound way. But definitely, we have to also question what kind of state we need, what kind of institutions we need, not organization, because institutions are one thing. They are enigma to many people. What is an institution? But we need not only organization, but institutions that work, that adapt, that continue, that forecast anyway. But this will come only if the choices are set. Will we ever do these choices?
Are there more questions for Lamia? We have time for one more. Yes, the lady in the front.
Nadine.
Just a brief intro, who you are.
My name is Nadine To. I worked for 15 years in private sector, different telecom. I worked outside and inside Lebanon. And now I work in development, economic development. So first, I want to make a small statement. I first want to thank you, Ronnie, for hosting Lamia. It's really amazing conversation and a lot to learn from. I've witnessed a lot of, I want to emphasize on one thing. It's always about people who make change. I witnessed a lot of organization. Because I never worked with the government, I always to say, government are corrupt and like label them. And the more I meet people like Lamia, like Libnor, I've had the opportunity to meet with them, Lena, exactly. I see how much there are qualified people inside the government sector, but they don't have the opportunity to, they keep, and I believe that change should come from within. And you said it. And really, I believe in it because we as outsiders or private sector activists, whatever, we don't know what's the ends out. We might criticize, but we need people who know that. For my question, I want to ask you first, who, like any organization, who drive your agenda? You have many policies to work on, many things to analyze, like a budget. Who drives your agenda? Who puts what we need really now is a priority to work on? And the Institute itself, can it perform itself without Lamia in it? Because what I have seen in Lebanon so far, it's always about the people on top of things who makes the change. It's not the institution because we don't have a system in this country. And it's always a belief of people who drive things, not the system itself. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine. This is really quite interesting, but I have the answers. I have them. Actually, we thought about them. On who drives the agenda. First of all, thank you for acknowledging that all these wonderful people you met. And I wish there are forums where people can meet people in government. And I think this is something that is weak. The link is weak. And sometimes, Roni, I was surprised in many social circles, people do not introduce themselves as public servant. This is because the society doesn't like, to see public servant. Yep. There is a label on public servants that is that you want to hide.
Yeah.
So there are very few who, you know, are proudly civil servant, let's say. So again, it's always a two-ended game, two-end game.
It's interesting. Bankers and public servants are both getting a bit bad rep at the moment.
Yes, and that's what we tell always our students and people we encounter. When you say government, it doesn't mean minister. Okay, so often on panels say, but government is represented. No, I mean, when we're discussing technical issue, the minister is not the public institution that is concerned with, problems of firefighting, for example, or of water quality. You should get the Litani River Authority to talk about that, or I don't know who to talk about that, or the Fa Madani. So anyway, but this is because we like to just summarize government with names, our minister, and there are reasons for that. Taif had made it difficult. Let's not go into a very long conversation here. But who drives our agenda? Well, again, this is an interesting question, because we had always difficulties with ministers who wanted to drive our agenda. We are a public autonomous institution. We're the smallest in the government, with the smallest, miniest budget. And we also have the capacity to sell our services, to leverage resources. So we have enough flexibility to be independent a little bit from the minister. But there is a hegemony from the side of the political over technical matters anyway, which you have to deal with. And this you have to learn techniques. There is a very nice guide issued by the UK Public Service. It's called How to Deal with Ministers. Right, and it exists, it's on the internet, and it basically tells the administrator, the public leaders, how to deal with ministers, when to say no, how to plan, how to maneuver, etc. Very interesting. So I learned from it. The second, I try not to let anybody drive the agenda, but the actual planning and conception of the agenda, the design, comes from two sides. The demand, which we have, our own reading of the needs. We have tools that help us to do that. And a wonderful, wonderful team of people who work for the Institute, who work for the ideals that they have. They share lots of values. Those you have behind you somebody who shared with us few years. So she knows what I'm talking about. Naila knows us very well. Passionate people who really believe in what they are doing. And these people drive the agenda themselves. So I left the Institute for 2 years, and that was the ultimate test. And Nadine, it actually continued to work, and it continued to strive in extremely hostile environment, as Ramri said. I'm happy to say that, it can work. So we are, I said institutions are enigma. When do you become institution? When does an organization become an institution is a big question. But there are answers also to this question that you find in the theory of Mark Moores. This is a scholar that we teach at university. And he says that there are three major, ways for organization to become an institution. First, you have to have an identity and the competence that your stakeholder recognize. And I think the Institute of Finance has the identity and has shown to have the competence. And tell me no or yes, but I think it's a yes. The second thing is a strong reputation. The strong reputation and legitimacy. This strong reputation and legitimacy does not come from within. It comes from the stakeholders that work with you. And this is what helps you leverage resources, leverage support, leverage political backing if you need. And the third pillar for becoming an institution, I think this was the most important, is your enduring viability. So your capacity to continue while adapting to situations that can be good or that can be bad. And this is exactly what's happening now. We are in the worst of situation. Our slogan for this year, Ronnie, and again, we take it from all the great people that we work with, including your late dad and Basil and lots of fantastic people that we had to work, which shows Al-Hazima lan takuna qadaran. So that was the slogan of the 27 years. And we did not choose it for us only. Al-Hazima lam wa lan takuna qadarana. So we will not accept to be defeated. That was a message for all other people like us, those insiders who still want to believe that it is possible to do something, at least in this lifetime.
Well said.
Thank you.
I'll try to put this all together. You may be right that saying you're a public servant at a dinner party may not be the most popular thing, but in the last...
You might end up with no dinner, huh?
You might end up with a bill, yeah.
With a bill.
In the last 3 days, anyone that I said that I was speaking to you tonight had only praise from one of the most talented public servants in the country. So
Thank you.
I'll add that to the opinion. Also, I did not expect that kind of that bigger picture tonight. I did not expect it, and I think that's because a few of the things you've witnessed in your career here may actually offer a wider picture that too many well-minded financial experts avoid, and may not be their fault. But you're able to focus on fiscal awareness and reform, and acknowledge from the beginning of the conversation something that goes beyond that. It transcends it, which is the real political constraints we have. Some are internal, and you acknowledge that, and I think we all do. Ta'if is desperately in need of both implementation and then reform. So I completely agree. But you're also able to acknowledge Lebanon's place in the region and those paramount problems that can destroy any society, whether it's sectarian or secular. Also, that you're offering, I think, nuance in the debate, that not everything that comes from the more heated activist is necessarily accurate and doesn't necessarily reflect reality either. That triangular paradigm is healthy. I'm glad Nadia, I don't know. Naila, sorry. That we have someone in the room that actually learned that from you. I think more people can learn that today because there is a narrative war at play. There is a real anti-establishment sentiment that I think creates collateral damage in places it doesn't need to be. And that could be including in your world, which is the better-minded civil servant that's still trying. And they're not part of the problem. They're actually part of the solution. And then to acknowledge something else. Thank you for letting me bring up that Alaska model and my father's contribution to the Basil Fuleihan Institute. But it is true that whenever you bring economics and politics together in this country, if you go too far, you end up paying a price. Right. And both Basil Fuleihan and my father should be with us in the discussion. They're economists by training. One is advocating for an Alaska model. The other is, going back to the beginning, one of the best people I met that served Lebanon. I always think about this. He was killed younger than me today. He had already an established career in this country when he was killed. I'm older than him today. But that's the kind of person I look up to. Trying to think all of the accomplishments he would have made in the last 20 years. And one more thing. He's an advisor to a larger-than-life character in Lebanese history that's been praised and hated in equal measure. But I want Basil Fuleihan next to Rafiq Hariri. I want him in his ear. I don't want a populism sentiment, which is get rid of them both. Because the truth is, in this country, you end up getting rid of them both, and you're left with complete collapse today. That's not the story either. So burning down the house, I don't think, is the way forward. You've said that in different ways tonight. So thanks to the audience and thanks to Lamia.
Thank you.
That was terrific.
Thank you, Ronnie. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for making time before your trip.
Oh,
I'll plug the website into the episode, ioflebanon.com.
Institut de Finances. We
Institut
still keep
de
our
Finances Basil
French
Fuleihan.
tag.
And you can follow Lamia on Twitter. Next week is with an Italian journalist.
Oh.
So there's going to be a lot of Italians in the room, I think.
Oh, nice.
Maybe they'll order more wine and cheese than the crowd tonight.
All right.
No, but thanks to everyone for joining. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening and watching. And a friendly reminder to support this podcast by contributing through Patreon or PayPal. All links are in the details box. Until next time, I'm Rani Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.